Think you know Thanksgiving? Think again. These forgotten dishes once ruled the holiday table, and it's time to bring them back with a bang. Potato bowls. Get ready because your taste buds might just start a party when they hear what's coming. 5 glorious potato bowls. If mashed potatoes and tater tots had a baby, this would be it. Potato bowls ruled the 70s, probably because potatoes were growing faster than anyone could keep up. Not that anyone was complaining. They started out like any good potato dish, with a big pile of mash spots. But someone had the genius idea to roll that mash into balls, coat them in breadcrumbs, and deep fry them to crispy perfection. Yep, they were basically fried mashed potatoes. Sometimes there was even a surprise bit of cheese hidden inside, a little bonus for unsuspecting guests. While the outside was golden and crisp, the inside was always a mystery. Would it be light and fluffy, or a weird gummy blob that tasted like paste? It was a gamble, but that was part of the charm. Everyone took a bite, hoping for magic. It's kind of sad that potato bowls vanished from Thanksgiving tables. Mostly because they took a ton of work for something that wasn't even the main dish. And sure, Mom always forgot to brown the rolls or burnt them to a crisp. But dinner was still delicious every single year. I'll never have another meal quite like that again. But hey, at least we've got the memories. Potato bowls were a blast while they lasted. But their time is up. These days, you won't find those adorable little orbs anywhere. Lattice apple and cranberry tart. Everyone has an apple pie recipe, but what about something with a little more zing? Enter the lattice apple and cranberry tart, the 70s fruit pie that tried to crash a fancy cocktail party dressed to impress. Sweet, tart, and totally irresistible, it had people sneaking back to the fridge for leftovers long after dinner was over. The recipe wasn't too fussy either. It started with a mix of tart apples and bright cranberries tossed in sugar and lemon juice, then spooned into a rich, buttery tart shell. The real showstopper was the lattice crust, where Mom would carefully weave strips of dough over the top like she was making edible artwork. Gordon Ramsay would have approved, or at least tried not to yell. It was definitely a labor of love, but if the tart wasn't baked just right, things could fall apart fast. The lattice? Charming but fragile. The filling? Sometimes more like fruit soup than fancy tart. Still, any flaws were forgiven the moment you took a bite. And speaking of unforgettable flavor, the next dish brings all the sweetness without any of the efforts, classic chess pie. Let's talk about a southern classic that has nothing to do with checkmates. Classic chess pie. This dessert is for those who believe classic means buttery, sugary, and straight up comforting. And while the name might confuse people, no, it doesn't involve AI. Chessboard. The story behind it is part of its charm. Some say chess pie came from someone saying it's just pie, which got slurred into chess pie. Others think it comes from its cheesecake-like texture. Whatever the truth is, the pie itself is delicious. It starts with a simple crust, which serves as the perfect base for a filling made of sugar, eggs, butter, and a splash of vinegar or lemon juice for balance. Everything is whisked together until smooth, poured into the crust, and baked until set. When it's done, you get that signature slightly cracked top, a clue to the gooey, sweet filling hiding inside. It's rich, nostalgic, and sweet enough to silence any dessert debate. And conveniently, our next dish hits that same sugar high in a fluffier, weirder way. Cranberry fluff salad. Okay, it might not win any beauty contests, but cranberry fluff salad, total flavor bomb. This was the 70s dish that blurred the line between salad and dessert. and made you question whether veggies were ever really necessary in a salad to begin with. Cranberries and Thanksgiving go way back, like 1620s back. Native Americans had been using the tart little berry long before pilgrims showed up and made it a holiday tradition. Fast forward a few hundred years and you've got this pink, fluffy creation made with canned cranberry sauce, thank you, shortcuts, mini marshmallows, whipped cream, and chopped nuts like pecans or walnuts. Once it chilled, it looked like a pastel cloud with marshmallow surprises hiding inside. Sweet, tangy, and delightfully retro, it was hard not to smile when you saw it wobble on the table. But if that dish was all cute and innocent, the next one on our list sounds terrifying, even though it turned out to be secretly amazing. Giblet gravy. Let's be honest, giblet gravy doesn't exactly sound like something you'd rush to pour all over your Thanksgiving plate. It kinda sounds like a medieval punishment. But behind that unfortunate name was a sauce so flavorful, it could turn even the driest turkey into a mouth-watering masterpiece. The giblets, those mystery organs you find tucked inside the turkey, were the star of the show. Most people tossed them out without a second thought. But in the 70s, frugal cooks saw their true potential. The heart, liver, gizzard, and neck were simmered low and slow to make a rich broth that formed the base of the gravy. Once the meat was tender, it was chopped into tiny bits and added back into the pot along with pan drippings, a bit of flour or cornstarch for thickness, and plenty of seasoning. The result? A deeply savory, slightly chunky gravy that packed a punch with every spoonful. It might have freaked out some squeamish eaters, especially the kids who panicked at the word gizzard. But those who dared try it were often surprised by how much they loved it. Giblet gravy became a quiet hero on the Thanksgiving table. Not flashy, not pretty, but absolutely unforgettable. And coming up next, a dessert that was just as bold but way prettier. Pumpkin chiffon pie. If traditional pumpkin pie is the warm hug of Thanksgiving desserts, then pumpkin chiffon pie was its stylish cousin. Lighter, fluffier, and dressed to impress. It floated onto the 70s holiday table like it had just stepped off a runway. And suddenly, Grandma's old school pie had competition. This wasn't your dense, heavy dessert. Pumpkin chiffon pie was all about texture. Airy, silky, and smooth as a cloud. It started with the classic pumpkin puree, spiced just right with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. But instead of baking it into a solid custard, the filling was mixed with whipped egg whites and gelatin to give it that signature lift. After the airy mixture was poured into a flaky, pre-baked crust, it was left to chill in the fridge until it set. The result? A pie that jiggled like jello, but melted in your mouth like mousse. To top it all off, a layer of whipped cream was added with a sprinkle of nutmeg. Because why stop at elegant when you can have extra? Pumpkin chiffon pie didn't just look fancy, it tasted like a lighter, dreamier version of the classic. But over time, people returned to the original, maybe because chiffon pies were trickier to pull off, or maybe because nostalgia always wins. Either way, it left behind some very sweet memories. Sweet potato marshmallow bake. This was the side dish that blurred the line between dinner and dessert. And no one was mad about it. Sweet potato marshmallow bake was a 70s Thanksgiving icon. The kind of dish that made kids skip the turkey and go straight for the sugar-coated yams. It all started with mashed sweet potatoes, already naturally sweet, but in true retro fashion, that wasn't enough. Brown sugar, butter, and a splash of vanilla were mixed in until the whole thing tasted like dessert in disguise. Some recipes even threw in a pinch of cinnamon or a dash of orange juice for a zesty kick. But the real showstopper? The marshmallows. Mini ones piled high across the top like tiny puffy clouds. The casserole was popped into the oven until the marshmallows turned golden, toasty, and irresistibly gooey. When it came out, it looked like something out of a dream. Caramelized sugar on top, creamy goodness underneath. Sure, it was over the top. Yes, it confused guests who weren't sure if they were supposed to eat it with dinner or dessert. But sweet potato marshmallow bake didn't care. It came to shine, and it did. Of course, the next dish on our list, that one had a much tougher time proving its worth. Green bean casserole. You couldn't escape it. Green bean casserole was the ultimate 70s side dish, showing up to every Thanksgiving, like it had a permanent invitation. Whether you loved it or just tolerated it, out of respect for the cook, it was always there, usually nestled between the stuffing and the mashed potatoes. The recipe was classic simplicity, straight out of a can. Green beans, often the limp kind from a can, were mixed with a can of cream of mushroom soup. Then came the secret weapon: crispy fried onions, folded in for crunch and sprinkled on top like culinary confetti. The whole thing was baked until bubbling and golden. It was creamy, salty, and crunchy all at once. Comfort food at its most unapologetic. It didn't try to be fancy. It didn't care about presentation. But somehow, year after year, people kept going back for seconds. Sure, the beans were never as fresh as they could have been. And yes, the casserole sometimes turned into a soggy mess. But green bean casserole had charm. It was reliable, familiar, and it held its ground as a Thanksgiving staple long after its prime. Next up, a retro dish so oddly ambitious it might just be the weirdest thing ever to grace a holiday table. Jello salad. If the 70s had a food mascot, it was Jello salad. No holiday table was complete without one shimmering, jiggling creation that looked more like a science experiment than something edible. But oh, did it have a fan base, and not just among the kids? This wasn't your average cherry jello. No, Jello salad was a bold blend of colors, textures, and questionable ingredients. Think lime gelatin filled with crushed pineapple, shredded carrots, or, brace yourself, cottage cheese. Some versions even included mini marshmallows or canned fruit suspended mid-wobble like relics trapped in amber. It was served cold, sliced like a cake, and sometimes placed on a bed of lettuce for that extra fancy touch. The flavor was unique, sweet, tangy, with a texture somewhere between chewy and creamy. And yet, people loved it. Maybe because it was fun, maybe because it reminded everyone of simpler times. Jello salad eventually faded from fashion, banished by modern taste buds and trendier sides, but for those who grew up with it, just seeing that neon-colored mold brought back a flood of memories, and maybe a little curiosity about what it actually tasted like. Up next, a dish that had zero neon colors, but still managed to leave a lasting impression. Sweet potato rolls today, we're throwing it back to a roll that deserved way more love: sweet potato rolls. These fluffy golden beauties once ruled the breadbasket, but somewhere along the way, they vanished from our tables. Maybe it was the rise of carb-cutting diets, or maybe they just couldn't compete with stuffing and mashed potatoes. But back in the day, they were perfect for soaking up every last drop of gravy or making mini leftover turkey sandwiches. The secret? Swap all the liquid in your dough with mashed sweet potatoes. You'd start by boiling or baking the sweet potatoes until soft, then mash them into silky perfection. Fold them into a basic dough with butter and a hint of brown sugar. Shape, let them rise until pillowy, and bake until golden and slightly sweet. When done right, they were soft like clouds, warm like hugs. Sure, they didn't always rise to the occasion. Some turned out dense or too sweet, But when they hit, they hit. Still, if you are craving something more reliable, our next dish brought both consistency and a surprising twist. Sour cream raisin pie. This one might sound like someone raided the pantry at midnight and threw things together. But sour cream raisin pie was actually a big deal back in the 30s and 40s. A true Midwestern classic, it's proof that the strangest combos can sometimes be the most delicious. At its core, this pie is all about contrast. Tangy, creamy, sweet, and spiced in all the right ways. You'd start with a traditional pie crust because, well, it's not pie without it. Then came the star, a filling made of sour cream, sugar, eggs, and lots of raisins. Toss in a dash of cinnamon and nutmeg to warm things up and cook the mixture on the stove until it thickened into a smooth custardy base. Once poured into the crust and baked, it set into a silky pie, dotted with plump raisins, fragrant, nostalgic, and oddly addictive. It may not be a headliner at most modern Thanksgiving tables, but one bite and you'll see why it had such a strong fan base. Now get ready, because the next dish will have you floating on a biscuit-shaped cloud. Angel biscuits. Let's talk about a biscuit so fluffy, so magical, it basically floated off the baking tray. Angel biscuits. These little pillows of joy were the love child of a buttery biscuit and a soft dinner roll, and they earned their name because biting into one felt like a hug from above. Making them was like a baking miracle in itself. You'd mix flour, baking powder, and baking soda for that classic biscuit lift. But then, plot twist, yeast entered the picture, giving these biscuits a tender rise that no ordinary biscuit could pull off. Buttermilk and a touch of sugar were added next, dialing up the flavor and richness. After some kneading and rolling, the dough was cut into perfect rounds and popped in the oven. What came out? Golden fluffy rounds that were lighter than air but still had that satisfying chew. They were perfect with butter, jam, gravy, or just straight out of the pan. These weren't just biscuits, they were the biscuits. And while they quietly disappeared from many tables over time, one bite would remind you exactly why they were once the star of every holiday spread. Ready for the next one? Because the next dish is so sweet, it practically needed a warning label. Candied yams. Candied yams might just be the ultimate Thanksgiving side. Sweet, sticky, and completely irresistible. They were the kind of dish that made you peek into the oven just to make sure they were really coming. Making them was blissfully simple. Start with peeled, chopped yams or sweet potatoes, then boil or roast them until tender. That's when the real magic began. The cooked yams were bathed in a rich, buttery mix of brown sugar, a splash of vanilla, and sometimes a dash of cinnamon or nutmeg for that cozy holiday vibe. Layered in a baking dish, they were topped with even more butter and brown sugar before heading into the oven, where they caramelized into gooey, golden perfection. The result? A side dish that looked like dessert and tasted like heaven. The syrupy glaze clung to each chunk, turning every bite into a sugary celebration. It wasn't just a side, it was the one everyone secretly hoped would have leftovers. And let's be real, a second helping was never out of the question. With something this good, who could resist? But buckle up, because the final pie on this list brings the bold flavor of bourbon and apples into one unforgettable dessert. Apple bourbon pie. Apple bourbon pie was the grown-up glow-up your traditional apple pie didn't know it needed. With a buttery crust, bold flavors, and a cheeky splash of bourbon. This pie wasn't just dessert, it was a statement. Perfect for impressing dinner guests or silencing your toughest food critics, yes, even the in-laws. It started with tart apples. Granny Smiths were the usual go-to, peeled, cored, and sliced. These were tossed in a sweet blend of sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg. But the twist came when a generous pour of bourbon joined the mix. That one step turned this cozy classic into a pie with personality. The bourbon added warmth, depth, and just enough edge to make it unforgettable. Piled high into a flaky crust and topped with either another crust or a fancy lattice design, it baked until bubbling and golden. The aroma alone enough to stop conversations mid-sentence. When sliced, the filling oozed with caramel-like richness, and each bite balanced sweet, spiced apple with that unmistakable bourbon kick. It's hard to believe this beauty fell off the Thanksgiving radar. If any dessert could steal the spotlight from pumpkin pie, it was this one. So tell us, did it just climb to the top of your must-revive list? Candied yams were the sticky sweet, melt-in-your-mouth side dish that basically doubled as dessert. You know the one? The moment it hit the table, all diets went out the window. Making them was blissfully simple. You'd start with yams or sweet potatoes, peeled and chopped into hearty chunks. These were either boiled or roasted until just tender. Then came the good stuff. Melted butter, a heavy hand of brown sugar, a splash of vanilla, and sometimes a sprinkle of cinnamon or nutmeg for that holiday warmth. Everything got tossed together and layered into a baking dish, then topped with more butter and sugar for good measure. After a stint in the oven, what emerged was pure gold. Caramelized edges, syrupy glaze, and that unmistakable aroma that drew everyone to the kitchen. Some even topped them with marshmallows, because why not take it over the top? These yams weren't just a side, they were the first thing people reached for seconds of, and the last thing scraped from the pan. With flavor this bold, it's no wonder they stayed stuck in our memories, even if they vanished from some modern tables. Sweet, nostalgic, and utterly irresistible. Candied yams were the ultimate reminder of cinnamon or nutmeg for that holiday warmth. Everything got tossed together and layered into a baking dish, then topped with more butter and sugar for good measure. After a stint in the oven, what emerged was pure gold. Caramelized edges, syrupy glaze, and that unmistakable aroma that drew everyone to the kitchen. Some even topped them with marshmallows, because why not take it over the top? These yams weren't just a side, they were the first thing people reached for seconds of, and the last thing scraped from the pan. With flavor this bold, it's no wonder they stayed stuck in our memories, even if they vanished from some modern tables. Sweet, nostalgic, and utterly irresistible. Candied yams were the ultimate reminder. The Thanksgiving was as much about indulgence as it was about gratitude.